Oh, thank you, Paul. And isn't this a wonderful afternoon? You know, when I was looking at the weather reports, I was really concerned last night, but we couldn't have been luckier. And I'm glad you're all here, and I appreciate your coming. I was asked to do a little bit of a history of the cultural gardens, and I won't take too long, but I'm going to ask a question to start off with. All the children here, tell me what happened in 1796 here. Okay, that was the start of Cleveland in 1796. Moses Cleveland took a boat from Lake Erie up the Cuyahoga River, had a landing, and then slowly the city developed. And then in 1896, it was 100 years since the city first was developed, and it was the centennial. In 1896, Rockefeller Park, but Mr. Rockefeller donated this land to Cleveland. And he said that it could be put to good use. And it extends from Wade Park in the south to Gordon Park on Lake Erie. At the same time, in 1896, a lot of things were happening, and the Industrial Revolution was taking place. Many ethnic groups were moving from the old country to the new country. And sometimes they brought tensions with them. And the idea was, the city of Cleveland's idea was, give every ethnic group that wants it a garden in this area, give them a piece of land and let them develop it, and that'll be their particular center of action. And it was an excellent idea. And again, we're going back to Rockefeller giving the land in 1896. Now, let's jump ahead to 1916, the very first garden to be established, the British Garden. It was actually called the Shakespeare Garden because it was established not by the British community, but by people in Cleveland who wanted to have a special ceremony for the 300th year of Shakespeare's death. And so in 1916, there were various scholars who got together to talk about this, and city officials, and it was established by the city, the British Garden, opposite the Hungarian Garden, just on the other side of Martin Luther King Boulevard. Then for about 10 years, different communities thought about this, and they said, we want to have a garden here too. Now, it was still called the Shakespeare Garden, and it has a Shakespeare bust in there. But different communities started coming forth and saying, we want one too. So, does anybody know the second garden to be established? Hebrew Garden. The Hebrew Garden in that direction there. There was a visionary called Leo Weidenthal, who was an editor with a Jewish newspaper, and he said, he was also a great Shakespeare scholar, and he loved that garden, the Shakespeare Garden, and he said, I would like to establish a Hebrew Garden. And indeed he did. He got a lot of action together, and when I take people on a tour of the gardens, when we go on Lolly the Trolley, I just have time to say one quick thing about each garden before we're gone past. And so for the Shakespeare Garden, I say, look up the road, up the pathway to the Shakespeare bust, and he's looking out over his flowers that were mentioned in his Shakespeare plays. When I pass the Hebrew Garden, which was established in 1926, I point out the hexagonal pool, fountain and 7 pillars underneath the pool, which represent the 7 pillars of wisdom, Solomon's 7 pillars of wisdom. Now, there are many, many more things in all of these gardens, but I'm just going to tell you one thing about each garden that I love. The third garden. Anybody want to volunteer the third garden? Come on. The German Garden in 1929. You've all seen, many of you have seen that magnificent statue of the Goethe Schiller, where they are, it's the next garden in that direction. They're standing up on a, If I stand next to it, my head is by their feet. So it's a very, very tall statue, and it's a beautiful statue of a writer and a philosopher. Now, in the 1930s, okay, that was the German garden in 1929. In the 1930s, we had a bunch of gardens developing, and they all had their own distinctive essence. The Slovak garden has two pillars looking opposite each other, two gentlemen, Ferdinand and Koller. And Ferdinand was a Catholic and Koller was a Protestant, two ministers. And the important thing also about the Slovak garden is that they had the very first One World Day celebration in 1946. We decided by then, and I'm going to tell you about the other gardens developing, that it was time to bring all the gardens to do something once a year. The American Colonial Garden was established in the 1930s, and the main thing about that is to me, the Mark Twain bust, which was paid for by children, school children, bringing pennies and dollars and whatever they could find to produce this wonderful bust of Mark Twain. There are other busts, but I appreciate the Mark Twain one. And also the Hawkins students are working to bring it back to the garden and put it back on its post. The Polish garden, to me it's a toss-up between pointing out Copernicus or Marie Curie. Being a female, I tend to point to Marie Curie, but Copernicus, the founder of the person who described the universe to people, that was a very, very important person in Polish history, and of course Marie Curie with her, a lady scientist. The Czech garden, I love music, and I'm going to pick out Dvorak to mention, the composer. Although there are seven busts, Dvorak is probably my favorite. American Legion Garden, almost the most southerly, not completely, the Chinese one is. We've got a bust of Lady Peace, and underneath the bust that looks rather like Miss Liberty is a crypt, and we've got soils of all the nations in the gardens deposited in there as they were developed. The Lithuanian garden, I love telling people to look up at the Lithuanian garden as we go past on MLK because of the shape. It comes down in the shape of a lyre, L-Y-R-E, a musical instrument, coming down the hillside. And, look up and see it. It's very, very elegant. That's the Lithuanian garden. Now, the next garden, when I first came here, was called the Yugoslav garden. And it divided up into three gardens. It's now the Slovenian garden, and the bust of Bishop Baraga is dominant there, and he was also the snowshoe priest. He brought Christianity to rather wild areas in America. And then Hungarian garden. Oh, this garden. I love the wrought iron gates that we pass under, and I want to tell you that at the dedication of the Hungarian garden, I believe it was 1938, just look around you, there were 25,000 people. Now, where on earth did they put them all? 25,000 people at the dedication of this Hungarian garden. The Irish garden with the beautiful Celtic cross shape and the grass in the outline. The Italian garden, the Renaissance fountain is so significant there. The Rusin garden, further on, Father Duknovich bust is down in the lower part of the garden. Ukrainian garden, as I drive past, the lady in the center is Lesia Ukranka, who was a poetess. The Greek garden, the Doric columns, they are a replica of Parthenon in Athens. The Estonian garden, Flame of Freedom on a stone column. If you look at it as you drive past on the other side of MLK, you see a white shaft with a flame on the top. Romanian garden, George Enescu, composer at that end on the opposite side of the street. The Finnish garden, Sibelius bust, a famous composer. The Chinese garden, you've got to go way down almost to Euclid Avenue to see the white structure dedicated to Confucius. India garden, I bet you've all seen Mahatma Gandhi on his salt march, walking along on his wonderful sculpture there. The Azerbaijan garden, again, you may have seen the stainless steel bowl-shaped item in the garden. It was also called hearth, where people sit around the hearth in a family group and enjoy each other's company. The Serbian garden has a winding walk with 4 busts, and it's a beautiful, peaceful way of walking through the gardens, which is up towards the very top up there in the north part. The Armenian garden, our newest one, with its beautiful tall structure with the alphabet written on it. Now, I've covered all the gardens that we have established, and we have developing gardens. We've got the African American garden, and you will see its flag flying, and you'll see beautiful flowers planted there. The Syrian garden has just started excavating their amphitheater that'll be down in this area here. The Croatian garden, just next to the Hungarian garden, where they're going to have a statue depicting an immigrant mother, a mother coming to America with her baby, holding it, an immigrant mother. The Albanian garden down near Rockefeller Park Greenhouse, Mother Teresa is planned as their statue. And the Native American garden have had a number of planning meetings, and they're getting things going. The Native American garden is sort of opposite the Serbian garden. Well, those are the gardens, and I hope that I gave you a little bit of a taste for the different gardens. And we had a president called Charles Wolfram, who was from the German garden, really, and he was our president for 25 years. So, Paul, you've got a few more years to go if you're going to match Mr. Wolfram's 25 years. So I would like to dedicate this afternoon, Paul has done it, our president, to the new Armenian garden, and we're glad to have our Hawkins students here. But I also want to remember Leo Weidenthal, who had the first idea of establishing all these gardens, and Charles Wolfram, who was president for 25 years. Thank you very much.